Hello. Okay, so me again, doing yet another update on belt tensioning, tuning, kind of rat rig VCore 4 review with IDEX kind of sort of thing that I mentioned. So I've actually got it in a pretty good state now. Y has 12K acceleration according to Input Shaper with MZV. And then my both of my x-axes are EI Input Shaper with around 6K acceleration, which, you know, honestly, it's pretty good, especially because there's only one belt per axis on this IDEX setup. It's not something like a dual core XY or anything of that nature. I'm overall pretty satisfied with the results right now. Now, like, the build experience has been interesting. You know, we've seen a lot of people on the forums talking about various aspects of the build, that unfavorable aspects of the build. And, you know, at this point, I feel like I felt like it would be fairly appropriate for me to critique a couple things in hopes for seeing improvements for the next iteration of this VCore. Because there's definitely a few little things that I think would make this build experience overall more reliable across a multitude of different sizes. One of the big things I want to say, frame assembly matters. It is, they say it's important in the manual when you go to assemble it. I cannot stress that enough. The manual says assemble on a flat surface. I say fuck that, go one step further, go down to your hardware store and pick up a 90-degree cabinet clamp that has a nice flat surface. Now, what that'll do is give you a nice flat surface for attaching these two, or all of these rails at a 90-degree, true 90-degree. Additionally, because it's a flat surface, it'll prevent this from twisting when installing and ensure these are flat when installing, and they will be clamped down. And then take get yourself a nice 90-degree square or flat surface to ensure that these edges line up perfectly all the way around. And this, you know, also applies to like gaps here. All of these extrusions need to be spot on. That's something you can do to avoid some of the headaches that I've had on my assembly. Apparently my surface was not flat enough, and some of these, particularly right here, I don't know if you can see it, but you can see some gaps in my foam where I was trying to check the flatness of these, and I was off by not a large amount. It was under a millimeter. It was closer to like 0.2 to 0.3, but you know, given these are almost 400, 500 millimeters long, that's a good size gap. And that all adds up to cause problems. And a lot of the reasons why it adds up to cause problems is because the layout of the mechanics of this machine the tolerances are insanely tight. So half a millimeter here, you know, a quarter of a millimeter here, quarter of a millimeter there, and all of a sudden your belts back here, when they vibrate, they're going to bump up against this rail and cause binding and cause a slowdown on your axis and acceleration. So a couple things I've done to help with that is a lot of the instructions for these plates say push all the way back and all the way, so against this vertical rail. I did not do that. And the reason why is because when you do that, this belt gets pushed back. This belt here, these belts get pushed back even further. And when they vibrate, they're going to rub up against this, reducing your response from the belts and the motors. And it's going to cause a little bit of friction. Additionally, with all of the holes drilled in, you have some sharp corners that are actually kind of hidden behind here from all the components here. And the belts will eventually rub up against that, and you will get a lot of deposit there, unnecessary wear on your belts. That just doesn't need to be there from vibration when you're tuning the belts when they're loose. When they're tight, not much of a problem in this area because they're right up against there. But you don't want your tolerances of your belts so close to any rails or anything that will cause it to catch. And particularly this back belt and these side belts are so insanely close to the rail that any amount of shift is going to cause a problem. Skew in your setup is going to cause a problem. So these are probably about, based off of what I could measure, only about 1.5 millimeters between the belt and the rail, or your aluminum extrusion, all the way around. And with the nuts that we use, the drop-in T-nuts, like these here, the drop-in T-nuts that can be dropped in after the fact, and the gap in the rail here being, about, I think it's 8.2, 9.2. I don't know what the spec is for the 3030s. There's about almost a full millimeter in play on how much you can shift this back and forth and in and out. And the nuts allow you to do that. So, because of that amount of play, 0.8 millimeters, and these belts being about 1.5 millimeters, if you push that all the way back, all the way against the corner, you're losing half of that gap of those belts that are getting from the idlers. I don't know if it's because I've got the heavy duty idlers and they feel just slightly larger than the regular idlers. I didn't measure them. I wish I did. Actually, you know what? I've got some heavy duty idlers. Let me just do a quick check on this. So heavy duty idler and a regular bearing. All right. So heavy duty idler, regular bearing. Where did I set here it is. Calipers. Heavy duty idling. Yeah, whatever, 12.95. Right. Zeroed out, so that was 12.95. Same thing over here. Okay, within margin, yeah, so they are the same width, so never mind. It has nothing to do with the heavy duty idlers. So either way, this belt path, God, I should not have put these panels on so you could actually see. Anyways, these belt paths in the back, let me turn the light on, are so insanely close, and these side ones are so insanely close. When they vibrate, they're probably bumping up against that. Especially if you push these plates all the way back and against this vertical rail. That gap is 0.8 millimeters. So like my gap right now I measured is roughly 1.5, and I've pulled this forward as much as I can. So that's about another 0.5 millimeter or more. So if I push that all the way back, damn straight that's going to vibrate against that. So what I would like to see on the next iteration of a rat rig is more room. A little bit more room between the belts and the various components, just to avoid any potential vibration and rubbing from when these are going high speed. I don't even, I mean, I could probably pull down the spec and check, or pull down the STL and measure all of these to see exactly how much gap there is. But I think the big issue that a lot of people are running into is that there's the errors as they assemble this add up just barely enough to cause problems in the motion system. And it's hard to find and fix those problems in the motion system because of how tight the tolerance is. Everything looks fine, and then it's not. So that's kind of the big thing, the big suggestion I would give for anyone building a rat rig and the next iteration of the rat rig. Second thing, they use plate stacks. So what I mean by plate stacks here, let me get example. So this is what I took off. So you have a plate, 3D printed parts in between. Now this is okay, but again, so this is okay, but again, we're talking about tolerances here. You know, this can twist, and this is a little bit loose because I've loosened everything up. But even when you tighten it down, there's enough play in here, almost 0.5 millimeter, in this can twist, in the way this can twist, shift forward, shift back, etc. Again, these tolerances all add up. So I had these on. I definitely over tightened them, the bearing stacks, so was compressing too much, which was causing binding. And it's hard to fix that. You have to take this piece off and replace it. Now, I picked up the stack from just a cheap Chinese stack from AliExpress. They use a dual female threaded core with 2 screws, one on the top or one at the bottom. So if you over tighten it, you're not changing the distance between these 2 plates. So you can't over tighten it. You can, if you over tighten it, you're just screwing up your core, your female dual thread, female threaded rod there core, and then bearing sits on that. So that has an advantage that you can't over tighten it. The second thing is that's all one CNC piece. It's lined up, milled together. You can't misalign it, that plate. This you can misalign and can get easily misaligned. And then also you have, this gets into another problem with the rat rig, is that the quality of the printed parts has been questionable. One of the common problems specifically with this part here is that either this rail or the part was not printed well enough, and the back plate there that sits flush on this rail causes the rail to be just a hair too long, like 0.5 millimeter too long, and cause binding because you have U-shaped guides that go on this to attach the rail to the millimeter extrusion. And when you do that and this is too long, what happens is this wants to bind. So it wants to go this way or this way, not straight. So you either have to shorten the rail, reprint the part so you have an extra space in here so it's not too long. In fact, actually too short would be a little bit better than too long, because you have plenty of room in there and plenty of grabbing room in there, even if it was too short, like 1 millimeter too short to play with. Because then you can just, extend it out 0.5 millimeter on each side. You'll have a 0.5 millimeter gap from the extrusion to the back of this printed part, and no problem. You don't have the same binding issue with it being too long. These, I don't know if you can see, but these are completely, I don't know. Yeah, those CNC carriages, they're all one part and they don't have a back. The back is open. So whether if the rail is slightly too long or too short, not a problem, not an issue. But getting into the printed part quality, you know, that's one of the issues that people have brought up. The other issue too is that people have had issues with delamination, like particularly especially these back here where you're supposed to screw in I've replaced both of mine with an updated model, a better model that uses that doesn't use threads, but the original version of this, as you threaded in the PTFE holder, it would split because the tolerances were terrible for the 3D printing, and it would just delaminate. It wasn't printed very well. Additionally, I had a similar problem with my shrouds here. This, was it this side? No, here it is. This screw here, notice it's silver, not black, that goes through the center here and down into the fan shroud. The tolerance on this hole was so insanely tight and causing so many problems. When I first tried to install it, I ended up stripping the screws that they provided insanely easily because this is a hex, not a torque bolt head, and it's flanged, so it sits flat, right, and self-aligns. But that just means that the head is more prone to stripping versus, say, a torque based at this size. So once I used a drill to get this out, I drilled the hole to be actually within spec, and so I could fit that in much more cleanly. So 3D printed parts tolerances are from RatRig are pretty questionable. I wouldn't say bad, but you know, they were the source of many of my problems on this. Another thing that, you know, I'm getting on tolerances again, but this is yet another stack here where the tolerances are important, and yet it's in the original for IDEX, it's a multi-plate design. There's 4 of these with printed spacers in between all of these, or in between. So you have one down here, you have a printed spacer here, one plate, another plate, printed spacer, another plate, then this final plate. And vertically, everything needs to align. If it's not aligned, it causes problems. Well, there's really nothing to align it. The only thing you have to align it is this vertical bar, but the tolerances on the plate are too tight and the belt gets too close that you really need to move this away from the vertical bar to provide enough tolerances for the belt. So you can't use the vertical as an alignment. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems with vibration on the belt. And I'll get into another vibration problem. And so this needs to be, again, redesigned to have another millimeter or 2 of gap. I would actually probably, you know, all in all, I think a single millimeter around this entire thing would be a lot better for all of these gaps. So this goes in a millimeter. So these are a millimeter thicker here and here. This we would probably need to cut. This would need to be cut shorter. So it wouldn't be a nice clean, 475 or whatever. But there's enough tolerances up here on the rail itself. So that doesn't need to be cut. Just the 2020 extrusion would need to be recut. And then these would be a millimeter deeper on both directions. So that way you could actually guide those, use the vertical to guide them correctly and provide enough gap for the belts back here. in order to get everything aligned. The other kind of problem I find with this is that the other thing I noticed is that when I had these pushed all the way up against the vertical, more vibration was getting through, was traveling through the system, and the system was louder. So by pulling it away just a slight bit, that noise reduced and the input shaper got smoother. So it's almost like we want, and maybe the play is to actually use the 1 millimeter thick PVA foam here as your guide in between this and the rail. But the problem is you need to adjust this up and down for skew after assembly, so this goes into assembly correctness yet again. Yeah, so I don't have a good answer for those back motor mounts. As you can see, these are from Mandala Roseworks. Mandala? He does an awesome job either way. It gets rid of the printed parts. These are definitely more durable than the plates here. These plates are either stamped or something. They are slightly bent, basically. I don't know with the manufacturing process or anything what happened, but the plates I had were just slightly bent, getting pushed in, so everything was over tensioned and springy. So again, this goes back to the tolerances of things of like, hey, you know, it's a great design, but for a home assemble kit, the tolerances are probably just a smidge too much. And adding a millimeter into a lot of these gaps would smooth this out, would smooth a lot of these things out. Again, you know, people have talked about the PTFE tube routing and having this tube go bend in and then bend back. That's a lot of friction that adds up into that. And a lot of people want to attach this to the umbilical cord, which again causes a bend and causes more friction and causes a longer PTFE tube. So there's definitely small improvements that would make a huge difference in version 4.1 of this kit. I don't know all the improvements. I'm not an engineer. I'm just a programmer. But these are the issues that I've kind of run into and on assembly, and the upgrades that I've done that have made the most impact have very much been around the motors and the motion systems. It is an IDEX, it's a Core XY that goes into an IDEX. It is finicky, it is hard to tune, and those tolerances are... It's hard to get those tolerances tight enough with the design of this machine that you can assemble it, that it's not going to pull, you're not going to want to pull your hair out after you assemble it for trying to tune it for a little while. I think, you know, increasing adding some buffer into some of these areas and improving design on these motor mounts, away from plate stacks that can shift towards things that are more all in one piece, or maybe, just maybe on the plate stacks here, don't do the hole in the back, allow for flexibility of the rail, or, if it's too short and too tight. But probably what we should end up doing is, if you want to stick with the plate rack, is have knobs on the plate rack, just kind of triangle shaped knobs that will slide into on both sides of the top plate. Maybe there's a hole cut in here, so it's self-aligning, right? That may help. That would definitely help. Getting proper tension specs for these bolts and everything out there. Like, how tight do these need to, do these bolts? Should these bolts be? All that stuff is missing from the manual, and we've kind of had to trial and error on this. Another thing you probably noticed, I don't have a rat rig bed anymore because mine deteriorated after printing PETG on it. Deteriorated very quickly. So I picked up one from Wham Bam. So far it's held up quite well. Overall, the kit's good. I do like the printer. I do enjoy the printer. I am fussy and nitpicky about rigidity and tolerances on things enough to where, the plate stacks and the motor stacks bother me the way they're designed. I think they could do better in those areas. And that's kind of the main thing I would like to call out for the next iteration is that if this was a machine that they were having a manufacturer build in a factory like they're partnering with that one company, great. They can ensure the tolerances are fine. I think the tolerances for that from a factory build are fine. For a home user kit, I think there's room for improvement. But overall, the experience has actually been very, very nice. I have very much enjoyed the printer, have very much enjoyed printing on it. It prints well. The price was reasonable. Especially if they improve those aspects of the printer, I think would be spot on. I would not recommend this for, I mean, this goes into stuff I've always said is that if a user, this is a printer for a first time user, the answer is no. Absolutely not. Do not kid yourself. That is, go get a Prussia, go get a Bamboo Labs, start with something that has the miles put on it for the assembly process. For people coming from, say, Voron, VZBot, whatever, yeah, you know what? They're not, I don't think they'll have too much of a problem. Especially if they follow the, various guides out there, various tips and everything, and that they kind of assure that everything's flat, not twisted, 90 degrees. And that's actually and to go back to this, these connectors were touted as, oh yeah, that's going to be 90 degrees flat, perfect. These are improved from the 90 degree plates. And while I agree these are better than 90 degree plates because you're putting force this way. So if this cut is flat and 90 degrees, it's going to be 90 degrees against that because you're forcing it against there. So that is true. It is going to be easier to get 90 degrees, but you can still twist this, and this is only as good as the cut is. Also, you can skew it front and back. So the plate approach, while it, you had questionable on 90 degrees, it was always going to be flat, so it wasn't going to be twisted, and it wasn't going to get shift back and forth. So the plate approach had a problem with 90 degrees, but it didn't have a problem with twist or skew. This approach has a problem with twist and it has a problem with skew. But it doesn't have a problem with 90 degrees, assuming the 90 degrees cut. So you took two constraints out of three constraints. So you went from the twist and skew constraint to the 90-degree constraint. So you went from, there's essentially three things. You want to ensure flatness, so you're not skewed, you're not twisted, and that this is 90 degrees, right? Those are your three constraints. So the plate ensured two of those. This ensures one of them. So I don't know which one I would have preferred, the 90-degree plate or this. I do like this because I have 90-degree plates down here. So, and I've used 90-degree plates on other printers. So I think for assembly, this is fine. It's just you need to get yourself a 90-degree clamp and ensure this is flat and not twisted. So you get one of those 90-degree clamps that has dual action clamp going this way, clamp going this way, and a flat surface that you rest both of these on to ensure this gets 90 degrees, this gets 90 degrees. There's no twist on either of these, and there's no skew offset on either of these. So that ensures all three constraints are tightly coupled. And that assembly will definitely make the process much smoother. Anyways, this is getting long. I apologize for very, very long video on this one. I'm not going to cut it down. Sorry. Have fun. Enjoy.